And we continue with our American stories. And up next, a story from Brad Server. Brad grew up watching the Three Stooges on TV, not knowing he was related to one of the greatest comic performers of all time. Every day after school, Brad, his brother, and their friends would pile in front of the TV to watch their idol, Jerome Howard, best known as Curly. Then one day, the secret about their unknown grandfather was unveiled. Here's Brad Server, a.k.a. Curly G.
So after my parents divorced in 1971, it was, a typical arrangement where my brother and sister and I lived with my mother. My dad would then move to Pacific Palisades because he was doing well in the insurance agency that he was working for. And then later, my brother would wind up moving in with my dad. A year later, I would move in with my dad. But we really started showing signs that we had something very special in our blood because we were performing. My brother was a self-taught piano player, I think at the age of 5. We all loved to sing. We would gather around the piano, my sister, my brother and I, and we could all carry a tune. So, it was great. So we would sing songs. Later it would develop into performing makeshift musicals for, my grandparents at the time, or my mom. If she was to drop us off, we'd say, "Mom, come in and see this." And we would do the famous shows of that time in 1971, 72. We were doing Cabaret, West Side Story, Sound of Music. And to this time, we came home like every other kid. After school, we came home and we wanted to see the Stooges. So we'd rush home, we'd watch in LA, it was Channel 52 UHF, and you had all the great shows that were coming on. You had Kimba, you had the Three Stooges, the Little Rascals, you had Speed Racer. I mean, all these great shows, but the Stooges is what we came home to watch most. And Curly was our hero. My brother and I both loved Curly the most. But the problem with that was, at this age, I was 6, my sister was 8, my brother was 11. We had no idea that we were the grandchildren of Curly. We hadn't been told yet. But it was this one day that we found out. I believe I was maybe 8 at the time, maybe my brother was 12, somewhere around that time. And my grandmother had taken my brother Darren to see his first Broadway musical, Fiddler on the Roof. And he was at awe when he saw the show. I mean, after the show, when they were driving home, my grandmother and him, he just kept going on and on of how he wanted to be an actor. He wanted to be an actor, and he was just persistent and on. And I think finally my grandmother said, "Darren, enough. I get it. It's probably because show business runs in your blood. Your biological grandfather was Curly from the Three Stooges." "What do you mean, Grandma?" Yes. Never mind that. You have your grandfather that you have now. So just know that your talents come inherently through your bloodline. And just don't carry on with it when you get home, la la la. So it's like, my brother was basically in shock. He didn't say another word, I think, on the way home. And then he comes home and he tells me. Yeah. And we're like, I was like, you have to be, that's not true.
Certainly.
And he's like, "Bradley, it's true. Grandmother told me." And we were just, we were like, what do you do with that? I mean, your heroes become your family.
We're not ordinary people. We're morons.
And then what are you supposed to do with that? I mean, did I really think, or did we really think the next day when we went to school, and tell our friends, the same kids that came home with us every day to watch the Stooges, we were now saying, "Oh, by the way, Curly is our grandfather." So, we live with it. We watch the Stooges. We're like, wow, that's our grandfather. And it was like, we didn't talk about it when we were at our dad's once we found out, because, of course, that's my mom's father. So he doesn't want to hear anything about my mom. They're divorced. My mom, she didn't talk about it because, one, she was very young when Curly died. She was 14. When she was 3 years old, she was, adopted by her new father. So that really became her everyday father. She channeled out the Three Stooges. Curly was just not something that she talked about. And then it was something that we were kind of told not to talk about, because even though our grandfather, Moses Diamond, was an amazing man and an amazing grandfather to us, he wasn't Curly Howard from the Three Stooges. So we basically were in check. So, through high school, did I talk about being Curly's grandson? No, not really. I was already class clown. I was space case. I was the guy that they wanted. Everyone wanted Brad Server to go to the parties because I was the funny guy. It was probably only later, if someone didn't like me or some guy was going to kick my ass or whatever, that they would go, hey, by the way, that's Curly's grandson. And then the person would say, oh, okay. Gave me a little a hall pass. So I continued through the 90s, build my career. And I still at this point hadn't met anyone from the Three Stooge family. And I was 30 years old or something at the time. It was just, it didn't even cross my mind, but it was one day my mom said, hey, Aunt Joan, which is Mo's daughter, is having a little reunion at her house. And so I went to this reunion where I met my Aunt Joan, Mo's daughter, and it was great. She was an incredibly wonderful, warm lady, and she had so much memorabilia, and it finally was a chance to talk about, being the grandson with another family member. And it was great. And it was so odd that all these years later, why am I just talking to a Stooge family member? The whole thing about being the grandchildren of Curly Howard, one of the most iconic comedians of all time, was suppressed. It was like we weren't to talk about it. We didn't talk about it. But now I was with Mo's daughter, and this would start turning into spending more time in the future with Stooge family members, which was great. But what really turned my life around was in 2000, I had my daughter, Elizabeth Elaine Server, and her middle name Elaine is after my grandmother Elaine, and that really changed my life. I always knew I had the parental part of me in me, and it was as though that really was my purpose. And I love being a dad, and had my career, but I still hadn't gotten in the Stooge thing until I went to my first Stooge convention. And these conventions were going on for a long time, and they were usually in Pennsylvania, in Fort Washington, Pennsylvania, which is about 30 minutes from Philadelphia. And I went to my first Stooge convention, and I met the fans, and the fans are so endearing and amazing. They love the Stooges to this day. They mean everything to them. And I would hear the stories of how the Stooges changed their lives and how much the Stooges mean to them.
To catch the rest of this remarkable story, go to the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.